My son-in-law got drunk at my 80th birthday and called me a family burden. I stood up and read my will out loud. I'm Eleanor Whitfield. Everyone calls me Nora. And on the night of my 80th birthday, my son-in-law stood up with a glass of Cabernet in his hand and told 22 people at that table that I was a burden his wife had been carrying out of guilt. He did not know I had a sealed envelope in my handbag. He did not know what was in it. By the time the valet brought his car around, he did. It was 6:40 on a Saturday evening in April, the kind of early spring evening in Charleston where the light goes gold before it goes anywhere else. I was sitting at my dressing table clipping on the pearl earrings Frank gave me for our 30th anniversary. My hands were steady. They had been steady all week, which should have told me something. The private room at Magnolia and Vine had been booked for months. Denise had planned it. 22 guests. A cake with 8 candles standing in for 80 years, because the baker said 80 individual candles was a fire code issue. My son Gregory was flying in from Atlanta. My granddaughter Lily had made a card by hand, the kind with glued-on paper flowers, the kind you keep in a drawer for the rest of your life. I had spent 41 years as the owner of Whitfield Ledger Services, 3 blocks off King Street, doing the books for half the small businesses in this city before I sold the firm in 2009. I know what a balance sheet looks like when something doesn't add up. I know what a family looks like when something doesn't add up, too. I just hadn't let myself read that particular ledger in a very long time. I want you to remember 3 names tonight. Marcus Kane, my son-in-law, who married my daughter Denise in 2003 and has spent every year since convincing this family that his charm is the same thing as his character. Denise, my daughter, who loves peace more than she loves the truth, which is its own kind of grief to carry as a mother. And Lily, 16 years old, my granddaughter, who is the only person under this roof who ever asked me a real question and waited for the real answer. I should tell you about the folder first, because the folder is why I was calm when Marcus stood up with his wine glass and started talking. 3 weeks before my birthday, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was clearing out the file cabinet in my sunroom, the one Frank built into the wall in 1988, the one nobody in this family has opened since he died in 2019. I was looking for our marriage certificate. Lily needed it for a school genealogy project. Instead, I found a manila folder labeled in my own handwriting from 11 years ago. Kane, Bridge Loan, 2015. I had forgotten I labeled it that way. I had not forgotten the loan. $85,000, wired from my account at First Charleston Trust on March 3, 2015, to help Marcus open his own real estate brokerage. He called it bridge financing. He called it temporary. He looked me in the eye across my own kitchen table and said, "Nora, 18 months, tops, and I'll pay every cent back with interest, I promise you." I have the promissory note. I have his signature. I have 11 years of nothing. I sat on the sunroom floor with that folder in my lap for a long time. I did not cry. I have found, at 80, that I mostly don't anymore. I filed it back where it belonged, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I thought about the word bridge, and how a bridge is supposed to go somewhere, and how his head simply stopped in the middle of the water. Let me back up further, because you should understand what kind of woman was sitting on that floor. I was born in 1946 in a mill town outside Spartanburg. My father kept books for the textile plant, and by the time I was 12 I was checking his columns for him at the kitchen table, finding his mistakes, and he'd laugh and say, "Nora girl, you've got the eye." I married Frank Whitfield in 1968. We had nothing. We rented a 1-bedroom above a hardware store on Meeting Street and I did the books for that hardware store to cover the rent. By 1971 I was doing books for 4 businesses. By 1983 I had an office and 2 employees. By 2005 I had 11 employees and a client list that included half the restaurants on the peninsula. Denise was born in 1974. Gregory in 1977. I worked through both pregnancies with a ledger propped against my belly. I was at every recital, every game, every graduation, because I built a business that let me set my own hours, and I built it with my own hands, one client at a time, in a decade when banks still asked my husband to co-sign my own business loan. I tell you this not to boast. I tell you this because it matters later, when a man who has never balanced his own checkbook stood up in a private dining room and called me a burden. Denise was always the peacekeeper. Even as a girl, she'd stand between her brother and me during arguments, translating both sides, softening every hard edge. It made her a wonderful daughter and, I think now, a difficult wife, because she married a man who required constant softening. Marcus came into her life in 2001. Charleston-born, private school, a father who'd lost the family construction business to bad debt when Marcus was 19 and never quite recovered his footing after. Marcus grew up watching his father apologize for money, and I believe, if I am fair to him, that this is where the hunger came from. It doesn't excuse what he did. It explains it. He was handsome, and funny at dinner parties, and terrible with follow-through. Frank noticed it before I did. Frank always noticed first. That boy sells confidence for a living, Frank said, the week after their engagement party, sitting on our back porch with a glass of bourbon he'd stopped drinking except on special occasions. The trouble is, Nora, confidence isn't collateral. I laughed it off then. I have had 11 years to stop laughing. Now, let me tell you about the week after I found the folder, because that's when the second thing happened, and the second thing is the reason I brought a sealed envelope to my own birthday dinner. I was at Publix on Savannah Highway on a Thursday morning, the second week of March, reaching for a jar of the fig preserves Frank used to like, when I ran into Renata Cole. Renata has been my attorney for 19 years. She handled the sale of my firm in 2009, my will in 2012, Frank's estate in 2019. She is not a woman who makes small talk in a grocery aisle by accident. Nora, she said, do you have a few minutes? I'd rather not do this over the phone. We sat in her car in the parking lot with the air conditioning running. First Charleston Trust flagged an application on the equity line tied to your home on Rutledge Avenue, she said. A home equity request for $140,000, submitted in February. Your signature is on it. I didn't sign anything, I said. I didn't think you had, Renata said. The bank's fraud department paused it before it went further, because the disbursement account listed wasn't yours. It was a business account. Kane Realty Group, LLC. I sat very still in that passenger seat. I remembered the day, back in January, when Marcus had asked me to sign what he called an updated homeowner's insurance form at my own kitchen table, sliding 3 pages toward me, the first page visible, the other 2 folded under. I remembered thinking his hand was shaking slightly when he handed me the pen. I had signed it without reading past the first page, because he is my daughter's husband, and because in 40 years of doing other people's books, I had never once imagined I needed to protect mine from my own family. What happens now? I asked Renata. The bank froze the request pending your written confirmation, she said. You have every right to report it as fraud. You also have every right to do nothing, if that's what you decide. That part is yours. I did not decide anything that afternoon. I drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I looked at the chair where Marcus had sat in January with his shaking hand and his insurance form, and I thought about the word bridge again. If you have ever realized, all at once, in a grocery store parking lot, that someone you trusted had already made up their mind about your money before they ever asked your permission, put the word signature in the comments below. Just that word. I read every one of them. I did not confront Marcus that week. I have learned, in 80 years, that the worst thing you can do with a fact is spend it before you understand its full value. I did what I have always done. I opened my own ledger. Over the following 10 days, I went back through every bank statement I still had access to as a trustee on the small family trust Frank and I set up in 1995, the one that holds the house on Rutledge Avenue and a modest investment account. I found 4 wire transfers from that trust's linked checking account between 2019 and 2023, each one between $6,000 and $11,000, each one authorized by a signature that was supposed to require my co-signature and somehow never had. I found them because 11 years running a firm that audited other people's books teaches you where people hide the seams. $41,000, moved in small enough pieces that no single transfer would have triggered a flag. Every dollar of it traced back, eventually, to accounts connected to Kane Realty Group. I called Renata again. I did not call the police, not yet. I told her I wanted to update my will, quietly, before my birthday. She asked if I wanted her present at the party. I told her no. I told her I'd handle the room myself, but I wanted the paperwork ready by Friday, sealed, ready to carry in my handbag like any other woman carries her lipstick. Nora, she said, are you certain about the timing? I've spent 46 years hosting this family's dinners, I said. I'd like to host one more. There was one more piece, and it came from the person I least expected. My granddaughter Lily has spent every spring break at my house since she was 7, ever since Denise and Marcus started arguing about money loud enough for the walls of their own house to carry it. 2 weeks before my birthday, on a Sunday, Lily was doing homework at my kitchen table while I made a pot roast, and her phone buzzed, and she went very quiet, and then she set the phone face down and didn't touch it again for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, after her mother picked her up, I found her school binder still on my counter. Not snooping, I want to be clear, I was returning it to my car to drive it to her the next morning, and a folded piece of notebook paper fell out. I picked it up to put it back and saw my own name written on it, and I confess I read it. It was a list Lily had started keeping, in her own careful handwriting, of things her father said when he thought she wasn't listening. Dates. Rough quotes. February 9th, Dad told Mom Grandma's house is basically already ours, we just have to be patient. March 2nd, Dad said Grandma won't even notice the loan is gone, she doesn't check her own statements anymore. March 14th, Dad said if Grandma ever finds out, we'll just say it's a loan like all the others. 16 years old, and she had been building her own file on her father for over a year, the same instinct I'd had at 12 checking my own father's columns, the eye for what doesn't add up. She had never shown it to anyone. She told me later she didn't know what she was going to do with it. She just knew someone should be keeping score, since no one else was. I sat in my car in her school parking lot the next morning and read that list twice before I drove home. Then I called Renata a third time, and I told her everything Lily's notebook confirmed, and I asked her one question. Can we still get everything finished before Saturday? Yes, she said. Nora. Are you sure? I raised 2 children to be decent, I said. I would like to find out, once, in a room full of witnesses, whether that decency is still in the building. The morning of my birthday, I woke at 6 a.m., the way I have every day since Frank died, and I made coffee, black, no sugar, and I sat in the sunroom with the folder from 2015 open on my lap one more time. I read Marcus's signature on that old promissory note. I thought about the boy Frank had described, selling confidence for a living. I thought about how confidence, when it curdles long enough, becomes something closer to entitlement, and how entitlement, in my experience, always eventually reaches for someone else's ledger. At 4 p.m. I picked up the sealed cream envelope from Renata's office myself. Inside were 4 things. A copy of the frozen equity line application with the forged signature flagged by the bank's own fraud department. A summary Renata had prepared of the $41,000 moved from the family trust between 2019 and 2023. A single typed page from my newly executed will, the paragraph naming the sole beneficiaries of the Rutledge Avenue Trust. And, tucked behind all of it, Lily's folded notebook page, which she had given me herself 2 nights earlier, sitting on my back porch, saying only, I think you should have this, Grandma. I didn't know what else to do with it. At 6:15 I put on the navy dress Frank always liked, and the pearl earrings, and I picked up his reading glasses from the top of my dresser, the tortoiseshell ones I still keep in their case even though I have my own prescription now. I put them in my handbag next to the envelope. I don't entirely know why. I think some part of me wanted him in the room. Magnolia and Vine at 7 p.m. The private room in the back, French doors, a long table set for 22, my cake already displayed on a side table with its 8 symbolic candles. Gregory had flown in that afternoon and hugged me at the door smelling like airport coffee. Denise had a corsage waiting at my seat, white gardenias, my favorite, and for a moment, seeing it, I almost lost my nerve. She does love me. That has never been the question. The question was always whether love, in this family, had ever been asked to share a table with honesty. Marcus arrived already 1 drink ahead of the room, having stopped, we learned later, at the bar next door with 2 of his real estate colleagues before dinner. By the time the appetizers were cleared he was on his 4th glass of Cabernet, and by the time the entrees arrived he had moved from charming to loud, the particular loudness of a man narrating his own importance to anyone still willing to listen. He told the table about a listing he'd closed that week, exaggerating the commission by what I calculated, out of old habit, to be roughly triple the real number. He toasted Denise for holding this family together. He toasted Gregory for finally settling down in a way that made Gregory's jaw tighten. And then, at 8:40, with the cake still uncut and the whole room warm with wine, he stood up, tapped his glass with a fork, and asked for everyone's attention. I want to be precise about what he said, because I have listened to the recording 11 times since, and precision matters more to me than drama. To my mother-in-law, he began, swaying slightly, one hand braced on the back of his chair, 80 years old, and God bless her, we all love you, Nora, we do. But let's be honest with each other tonight, because that's what family dinners are for, right? Honesty? A small, uncomfortable laugh moved through the table. He kept going. Denise has spent our whole marriage managing this. Managing you. The house, the bills, the worrying about whether you're eating right, whether you're lonely, whether you fell in the shower. It's a lot. It's been a lot for years. And I just think somebody in this family should finally say it out loud instead of pretending it isn't true. You've become a burden, Nora. A sweet one. But a burden. The room went the particular silent that only happens once or twice in a life, the kind where you can hear the ice settling in the water glasses. Denise's face went white. Gregory set down his fork very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter if you move too fast. Lily, sitting 2 seats down from her father, did not look at him. She looked at me. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because I know that's not what television has taught you to expect from a moment like this. I set down my napkin. I reached for my handbag on the chair beside me. I opened it, and I took out Frank's reading glasses, and I put them on, slowly, the way you put on the one thing that has always told you it was time to get to work. Then I took out the envelope. Marcus, I said, sit down. I have something for the table, too, and it seems tonight is the night for honesty. He laughed, uncertain, and sat, because 80-year-old women asking you to sit still carries a certain authority even in a man 3 glasses deep. 11 years ago, I said, I wired $85,000 to help you open your brokerage. You called it bridge financing. I have the promissory note in this envelope, Marcus, with your signature on it, and 11 years of a bridge that never reached the other side. I let that sit. I did not fill the silence. I have learned, in a lifetime of reading other people's numbers, that silence is where people hear themselves the loudest. In February of this year, someone submitted a home equity request against my house for $140,000. My signature was on it. I did not sign it. First Charleston Trust's fraud department froze it before it disbursed, because the account listed to receive those funds belonged to Kane Realty Group, LLC. Denise made a sound I had never heard her make before, something between a word and a breath. Between 2019 and 2023, I continued, $41,000 moved out of the family trust your father and I built in 1995, in amounts small enough, I imagine, to hope I'd never notice. I noticed. I spent 41 years finding the scene where numbers don't match the story people tell about them. It's not a skill you lose. I looked at Marcus directly then. He had gone the color of the tablecloth. You said tonight that Denise has spent our marriage managing me. I'd like to correct the record. For 11 years, I had been quietly managing you, hoping you'd find your own footing before I had to say so out loud. I financed your bridge. I have been financing it, without knowing the full weight of it, for far longer than 18 months. Lily spoke then, for the first time all evening, her voice steady in a way that made me proudest of any single moment in that entire night. Dad, I have a list, she said. I've had it for over a year. I heard you tell Mom the house was basically already ours. I heard you say Grandma wouldn't notice the loan was gone. I gave it to Grandma 2 nights ago because somebody needed to. Marcus's mouth opened and nothing came out of it. Gregory, my son, who has spent his whole life avoiding conflict the way some men avoid the sun, stood up at his own place at the table, and said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager standing up to a bully at his own bus stop, Marcus. Sit down and let her finish. I took out the last page. I revised my will 3 weeks ago, I said. The house on Rutledge Avenue and the trust behind it will pass, in full, to Lily, held for her by Renata Cole as trustee until she turns 25, with provisions for her education before then. A portion establishes a scholarship in Frank Whitfield's name for first-generation small business owners at the college where he taught night classes for 30 years. Denise and Gregory remain my children, and nothing about tonight changes how much I love them. But the house, the money, and the trust go to the one person in this family who has spent the last year quietly keeping an honest ledger, because apparently, in this family, that job needed doing by somebody, and I am too old to pretend I didn't already know who was doing it. The table did not erupt the way you might expect. It went the other way, quieter, heavier. Denise put both hands over her face. Gregory reached over and put his hand on his sister's shoulder, the first time I had seen him comfort her, rather than the reverse, in 20 years. A family friend at the far end of the table, Howard Ellery, who had known Frank since 1979 and had been the first accountant I ever hired away from a competing firm, stood up quietly and walked to where I was sitting. Nora, he said, I did your firm's audit for 6 straight years before you sold it. I want this table to hear one thing from someone who isn't your blood. In 40 years of knowing this woman, I have never once seen her numbers fail to reconcile. Not once. If she says the ledger doesn't match, gentlemen, the ledger doesn't match. Marcus tried to speak. What came out was smaller than what he'd started the night with. Nora, I was going to pay it back, I always meant to. I know you meant to, I said. Meaning to is not the same as doing. I built a business on that exact distinction for 41 years. He reached for his wine glass and knocked it into his water glass instead, and Denise, for the first time all night, did not move to fix it for him. The waiter brought the check near the end of the evening, out of habit, sliding it toward the head of the table where Marcus usually sat. Marcus's card was declined. Kane Realty Group's operating account, we learned in the following weeks, had been running on fumes for over a year, propped up by exactly the kind of quiet transfers I had just read aloud. Gregory, without a word, took out his own card and paid for the dinner. It was, I believe, the first time in 11 years he had paid for anything at a family gathering that Marcus was supposed to be hosting. I cut the cake myself. 8 candles for 80 years. I blew them out in one breath, which surprised even me. I want to pause here, because if you have ever sat at your own table and realized the people calling you a burden had, in fact, been quietly living on your back the whole time, I'd like you to leave one word in the comments. Ledger. Just that. I read every single one. The weeks that followed unfolded the way ledgers usually do, slowly, then all at once. The bank's fraud department opened a formal file on the forged equity application within a week. Marcus was not criminally charged, because Renata and I, in the end, chose not to press it that far, largely at Lily's request, but the findings sat permanently in his credit file, and Kane Realty Group lost its brokerage license by August after a state real estate board review turned up 2 other clients with similar complaints, entirely unrelated to me. He and Denise separated in September. She told me, on my back porch in October, that she had known, on some level, for years, and had simply never let herself add up the columns. You taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 9, she said. I just never wanted to read ours. Gregory calls every Sunday now, which he did not used to do. He apologized, in November, for years of assuming his sister and her husband had things handled, for never once asking me directly whether I was managing fine on my own, for calling it not his business when it was, in fact, exactly the kind of business a son should mind. Lily spends most weekends at my house now. We keep a real ledger together, an old-fashioned one, ink and paper, the same kind my father taught me on at that Spartanburg kitchen table in 1958. She wants to study accounting. I told her the eye either comes to you or it doesn't, and hers came early. I still love my daughter. I still love my son. I forgave Marcus, eventually, in the private way you forgive someone you no longer allow near your books. Forgiveness and access, I have learned very late in life, are not the same currency, and you are allowed to spend one without spending the other. I kept Frank's reading glasses in my handbag. I still wear them when something needs saying plainly. I think he would have liked that. I think he already knew, the day he called Marcus a boy who sold confidence for a living, that someday I would need to be the one holding the actual collateral in the room. If you've made it this far, here's the only thing I'll ask you to carry with you. Love your family. Feed them, forgive them, show up for every recital and every hard year. But never let anyone convince you that being needed and being used are the same word, and never let silence be the price of keeping the peace at your own table. I spent 41 years balancing other people's books before I finally sat down and balanced my own. Drop ledger in the comments if you've ever had to read your own family's numbers out loud. And if this story felt like your story, subscribe, because we've got more women at this table who finally said enough.